Why do I blog? 2 words. World domination.
Can see what I'm doing.
But like, it's pretty hard to do a group thing online.
What was going on and what God's brought me through.
It's going to transform theology forever.
This 2-3 year experience and go back and remember what that was like.
We all live in a community.
Going on in my head, and it'll go from my head out through my fingers. And
we've gotten interested in blogging at Asbury Seminary as a result of our Lily project. It's a Sustaining Pastoral Excellence grant, and one of the ways that we're trying to move in that is how can we help pastors develop sustainable practices? And I say pastors, I mean people in ministry in general. How do we help them develop sustainable practices? The best practices we can locate to try to help people sustain life in their ministry over the long haul. And we've gotten interested in blogging, and we've started a little experiment called the Asbury Bloggers Society. One of the great ironies of ministry is this, is that people in ministry tend to be the most isolated people on the planet. I can't explain that one. I mean, there are a lot of ways we could talk about it, but blogging is a way of helping a person to both develop reflective practices, looking inside of themselves, creative practices, as well as communal practices. I think of blogging as a means of grace. And that's what we're trying to explore. How can blogging become a means of grace? How can it bring together the inward life and the outward life in a way that brings sustainable life to a person in ministry?
I think the best way to describe why we do blogging in Asbury can really be illustrated by a Paul Newman movie, Cool Hand Luke. And in that scene, Paul Newman's character has escaped from this chain gang prison and is brought back, and the warden starts off this famous speech to the inmates, and what he says first is, "What we've got here is a failure to communicate." And I think that that's really applicable to what we're doing here with the Asbury Blogging Society. As our culture becomes more and more distant from each other through cell phones and iPods and PDAs and laptop computers, we really have lost the ability to communicate with people. We've failed to communicate. I spent a lot of time in undergrad doing research on this, and I really believe that blogging is a very, very powerful medium to help us learn to communicate and for us to communicate better with the people that we have spent significant time with before. Now, there's a lot of other great things about blogging, but that baseline at why we want to do this and why we're interested in this lies in the fact that as pastors, as ministers, as missionaries, as teachers, as counselors, as anything that we're doing the work of God, we have to learn to communicate with each other, and we have to learn to communicate with people as best as we can. And we think one of those ways to do that is through the spiritual discipline of blogging. Now, we don't want to say that we figured everything out just yet, But we want to invite you in to figure stuff out with us, to practice this, and to learn how to do this so as a community we can unite together and say we think that blogging is a really important thing for the 21st century.
So in Genesis, the only thing that God ever says is not good about creation is that human beings should be alone. And yet the crazy thing about ministry is that we find so often people are surrounded by people, and yet they find themselves strangely isolated. And we think blogging can be a way of developing both the inner life, developing creative practices, and developing community. This is not a substitute for face-to-face embodied relationships, but an enhancement of it. And the amazing thing about the internet is that it can be both a quite personal, even private domain, and yet at the same time it can be as introduced to the wider world as one wants to introduce it. And we're looking into all these sorts of possibilities through the Asbury Bloggers Society. We want you to join that today.